With your host, Andrew Donaldson. This is Heard Tell.
Welcome back to Heard Tell. Okay, one of my very favorite people to talk to. He's been here frequently, although it's been way too long, buddy. You've been too busy up there in the not yet Great White North, but give it a couple weeks. You're not too far from snow, I don't figure. He's up in the Minneapolis, St. Paul area. Great writer, OrdinaryDadsTimes.com, and his own writing at Medium, and his podcast, which we'll talk about in a minute. Dennis Saunders, how are you, sir? Great to see you again.
I am doing well, and probably it will be next week when it's the Great White North. You never know here in Minnesota.
Yeah, I was just talking to one of our friends out in Colorado, and they're like, you get 4 distinct seasons, but they come without warning. Same thing up there. It's like, it's 70, it's snowing. There's not a whole lot of transitional time, is there, up there?
No, there is not. There is summer, and then, a week of fall, and then 6 months of winter. So, yeah, this is Narnia, pretty much, without the Christmas.
Well, at least you got nice lampposts, which I do know Minneapolis has. We've got a mess on our hands, my friend. Let's talk about it. You were tweeting about the Herschel Walker thing. Hypocritical politicians are not new. I would say that's more the norm than the exception. So I don't think that's actually the story here.
No.
I think the story here is the intersecting lines, the cross streams, if you will, of how people are reacting to the hypocrisy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to debate the whole thing because it rehashes a lot, but the base level of it is none of this is new. If you Googled Herschel Walker, most of this information, even though we didn't have some of the specifics, this was all already out there. So the people that are thinking, well, this is going to, I don't think this actually changes this race all that much. I think it may change it a few points, and this is probably going to be a couple points race, so that may be enough. But this idea that the GOP is currently constituted after years of Trump is going to just abandon him because of this. We've already seen evidence. I don't think that's actually going to happen. How do you want to approach this? Because I thought you had a pretty strong line online, and I don't think you're wrong, although I would narrow it down. I don't think it's all Republicans or all conservatives or everybody on the right. But this is a good test case here is like, do you have a political party? Do you have an ideology? Or do you have a brand that you're going to protect at all costs?
Yeah, and I think what has happened with the GOP over the years is that the things that make up a political party, kind of the selecting of candidates, even the kind of the vetting, the whole how you handle candidates, even dismissing them, the power is gone. I think a lot of that has been steadily being eroded, and that even happened, I think, before Trump came on the scene. And I think that's actually why you see the rise of Trump. And at the same time, I think there's also this really rise in identity within the body politic, I think, as a whole, where who we are as Republicans and as Democrats we're just kind of bound up in that, so that it now becomes who we are and becomes our kind of our brand, our identity. And when it comes to people like Herschel Walker, since we no longer have that kind of party discipline anymore, but we have this kind of brand, that identity that we want to protect, and tribalism, basically what it boils down to is that how a candidate acts no longer matters. What matters is that they're on our side and they will vote our way. And, who cares if, our candidate who says that they want to ban abortion now actually also obviously paid for an abortion many years ago and doesn't seem to be bothered by it. So, I mean, I think that's where we are right now. And I think you see that among the Democrats to some extent as well, but it's far, far more pronounced with the Republicans.
Let's back up for a second, because I want to put a little context on this. There's a theme that runs through these stories every time we have them. Let's go back to the Obama administration. Remember the Treasury Secretary when he was the appointee and we found out all the stuff about him, and the line was, well, we have to have him for the good of the country. We got to have this guy. The line for Clinton, Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's okay that he lied because he's the president. Look at all the wonderful things he's doing. The
Mm-hmm.
folks that supported Trump, well, he's fighting all the right enemies. So you can pick anybody of any party
Yes.
going back as far as you want to go. You can go back to the Jefferson Madison crap. You know, it's the same thing as, well, my vision is good for the country, and that stuff got really ugly in the press. It's always the same story of, well, the rationalization is, well, it doesn't matter X, Y, and Z because we really got to have this person. We're talking about Herschel Walker, who in and of himself is a celebrity candidate for the U.S. Senate. He doesn't have any qualifications whatsoever for the job. He doesn't know how to do the job. It's strictly a celebrity candidate. And go ahead and miss me, because if the Democrats put up a celebrity candidate, I'll say the same thing about that. He's going against a sitting U.S. senator who, good, bad, or indifferent, if you don't like it, he at least has a track record in the U.S. Senate, a very pronounced progressive. That's who he is. That's the background he came through. You judge those two records. You have a celebrity candidate and you have a very traditional progressive incumbent candidate. That's this race. So even if you're going to go to, well, we got to have this guy no matter his record, I don't find that one bit compelling here, because I don't think he's really qualified for the office anyway. So now you're into, well, he's the lesser of two evil. You see where this is just becoming a swirling thing.
Yep.
It seems like we're doing it with every single freaking candidate that comes out that's on the fringes like this.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that, Raphael Warnock has his own issues. There have been allegations of domestic violence, and I don't want to equalize that. And this is not whataboutism, but it's the fact that, especially, it's more pronounced now than ever before, and it's been building over decades, is that our candidate is our candidate, and we will support them regardless of what they do, because they'll vote the way that we want them to vote. And I think I was reading the other day an op-ed by Henry Olson, who in the Washington Post, who said basically that he's a pro-life candidate. Raphael Warnock isn't, so we're just going to support him. Also, kind of forgetting that there is another issue there. It's not just the abortion issue. I mean, there have been also repeated allegations of domestic violence with Herschel Walker as well. And again, we're just going to ignore that because he's going to vote the way that we want him to vote.
Put your pastor hat on for a second. Bad behavior doesn't start with the worst behavior. It's a learned behavior, most of the time, with very few exceptions. The reason we're doing this politically is we have conditioned ourselves over many, many years to do this. And I'm going to go to Clinton because that was the first election of my lifetime, but this goes before him. I'm not just picking on him. That was the first time we did it in mass media as we know it today, with the internet, with mass media. We did the, oh, well, he's the president. Well, if anybody deserves some peace on the side, I heard network TV anchors say that. People don't believe me saying it. We had sitting United States government officials come out and say, well, we cannot allow this to derail the work of the people. That was the Clinton administration line for all of his lies. And we now know, we didn't know as much then as we know now, his other abuses of women that have been alleged and otherwise. And we had sitting people on network TV. I remember when it was live and it became legend after that. I'm sure there's YouTube. You had people sitting on network TV and go, it's amazing how well he lies to us. It's just a marvel to behold. That happened. I watched it. You watched it. We're old enough to remember this. That's the first time I remember it happening. Okay, that was a Democratic president and Republican response, and I talked about it on this program. Hey, look, Newt Gingrich had to resign. Livingston couldn't become the speaker because he had to resign in scandal. Gingrich had scandal, and then they got replaced by Hazard, who ended up going to prison for molesting children.
Yes.
So this is bipartisan mess. And then, but you want to know how you got Trump? That begot Trump eventually, because you just put things aside and you put it aside, and the Democrats put it aside, and the Republicans put it aside, and the Libertarians and the Independents and the Purple Hippopotamus Party, I don't care who it is. We've done this for at least the 30 years I've been following politics since I was a teenager. That got us to here, and we don't want to talk about that part of this.
Nope. No, and I think that is fascinating. The whole Clinton mess, I think in many ways, when Trump got into trouble in 2016, and now I'm forgetting the name of the program, but the tapes that were out there and the grab him by what, and everyone thought that was going to be, he was going to get derailed by that. And what did he do? The debates were coming up. He brought all of the people who had accused Bill Clinton of different form, either sexual harassment or even allegations of rape. He brought them on TV, and I think that pretty much effectively stopped any type of talk anymore about what he had done, because the Democrats didn't really have anything to say. They had a leader whose wife was now running for president, who did a lot of the things that we were now were being accused of Trump. And I think those things have a way of coming back around and biting people. And I think it is also in this time of age, and I think as a pastor, what tribalism does is that it blinds us to our own sin. So we don't have to see the problems that we are doing. We don't have this sense of introspection. And so we're blind to that. And again, kind of like here, we were talking about the Herschel Walker thing. It's bad, but we're not thinking about how other part, this has been part of a process, but as you said, has been building over the last 30 years, and that we just don't, we don't see it and choose not to see it because the other guy is worse. And so that's why we need to, elect our person so that we can have our policies put forward, and who care and to make sure that the other guy doesn't get in power.
The other guy, Dennis Saunders, joining us. The other person not getting in power is part of the problem here too, because we got some pretty amazing audio this week of one person in particular just saying, "Well, I don't care, just win the Senate." Well, hold on. The Republicans had the Senate just 2 years ago. They may lose it, they may gain it. It may be another split Senate for the next 2 years. The Senate is, in the last 15 years or so, it's never more than a 2 or 3 cycle thing. The Senate switches hands. Why do we just stop for a second and go, wait a minute, why are you trading all this goodwill and your integrity and all this for this temporary thing that we already know historically you're not going to have for very long? And then when you get it, frankly, Republican Party, you did precious little with it when you had all 3 branches of government. You didn't, even by your own standards, you didn't do very much with it. We're always told, most important election of our lifetime, if we just win the House, if we just win the Senate, both parties do this, especially the right, though. If you just win the Senate, if you just win the House, if you just get this governorship, how long are we going to dangle that carrot before people start taking some stock and go, well, wait a minute, this is just a perpetual thing? Because I'm on like my 9th or 10th most forced election of our lifetimes, right? At least you're on more than that. I don't have anything pithy to say here. I'm frustrated. I don't understand why people can't see past their noses on this stuff.
It's the age that we live in. We're just incredibly tribal, and all that matters is our tribe. And it doesn't even matter how long we have the House or the presidency or the governorship or the dog catcher or whatever. What matters is having it. That's the point. It doesn't even matter anymore about governing. We don't really care about trying to be to govern and to try to lead a nation of 330 million people. It's really about the prize, and that is all that matters. And I don't know how that changes. I really don't. like you, I'm frustrated. I mean, I am someone that is fascinated by politics, but I also want politics to do something, to aspire to more, to try to solve some of the problems that we face as a nation and as a world. But you can't have that if all that you're doing is trying to um, just grab the presidency or the Senate seat or whatever, just as a trophy. And that's kind of where we are right now. And I'm really at a loss anymore as to how we get out of that.
Yeah, Dennis Saunders joining us. He's got a couple different things going, like the Church and Maine podcast. I wonder with our politics, with everything being personality driven, let's be honest, the parties are now secondary to the personalities. That's the real problem here. I don't know how you ever fix a identity thing with a political solution. In other words, I think part of what's going on is we keep wanting to use the political parties to fix something cultural, and the political parties keep pitching culture to try to fix the politics, and never the twain will meet except in fundraising. Those are two tracks that sometimes they intersect. That's true, but most of the time they don't. And the thing is, you can keep that lie going for a very, very long time before they hit an intersection where it has to hit because something really big culturally or politically happens, a disaster happens, a crisis happens. Is that too cynical of a way of viewing this? Because I feel like that's kind of how this happens, is you just see that other train on the parallel track and you're just assuming they're never going to collide with each other. That seems to be kind of where we're at with some of this.
It is. And I'd go even farther to say what's happened is that politics has become a religion, and it's kind of become the worst aspects of religion, in that we are so kind of bound up by who we are, whether that's liberal or conservative, that we can't. It makes us kind of see the other side not simply as someone that's we disagree with, but as the enemy, and that enemy has to be defeated. And so when you're kind of looking that way, I think it allows you to excuse a lot. And I think that's kind of where we're at.
Dennis Saunders joining us. Let's just go there with that, though. We know historically all kinds of bad stuff happens under the guise of God wills it. You know, the old Deuce Vault from the Crusades on.
Mm-hmm.
God's a really bad excuse to do a lot of really bad human things. We know this is historically true. We're seeing it in the American church, and there's just no way around it. People get mad talking about this, but look, you're more of a mainline, you're more progressive, and I don't mean politically, I mean theologically.
Mm-hmm.
You're more progressive than I am. I'm more traditional, what people call evangelical, although I hate that term, and we'll debate that some other time. I think I come from a bit of a different tradition, but I'm way more conservative Baptist than you are. Here's where I know we agree because we talk about it so much. When you start substituting theology and politics together, I don't even know where to start with it even more, even though I've studied theology for 20 years, both academically and just because I really like it. But either your God is an omnipotent God that knows what's going on, or he's not. And if you're saying, well, I need to do this to win this election for God, that's not compatible with that. I hate to be that simple about this, but it really is that simple. When your church starts telling you have to do this, this, and this for God politically, number one is I don't think you're honoring God. Number two is I think you're fooling yourself and giving yourself too much of power that isn't yours in the first place to go do things that really isn't in your purview to start with. Yep. That's really Reader's Digest. That's really basic. I know people can pick that apart, but I'm tired of all the ethereal arguments on this. When you get down to the core of it, that's what it is. It's you have to do what I said to do because this is, and we just tack God in front of whatever X, Y, and Z is. That is extremely unhealthy for a church. It's unhealthy for it'd be unhealthy for an Elks organization. It's really unhealthy for a democratic republic that is pluralistic, that is rapidly diversifying, and that, let's call it what it is, that is losing any interest whatsoever in what Christian churches have to say about much of anything with the way they're conducting themselves. And I've got data to back all of that up. But what do you think?
No, I agree. I think that churches, especially I would say in the last 30, 40 years, we've done a bad job of being, I think, a good type of Christian witness. We have kind of substituted the rough and tumble of politics, and kind of jammed that into religion, and then and so, in some ways we end up with where we're at now with Herschel Walker. So, we can say, yes, abortion is sinful and bad and wrong, and we're going to also support this guy who paid for an abortion. And I think there's something I've heard David French talk about, and I've heard about it too, and you're probably familiar with it even more so than I am, is that there is a certain group of people in the pro-life movement that are far radical, the abortion abolitionists, who basically there is this sense of no abortion whatsoever, even if it's to save the life of a mother, and that if a woman has an abortion, well, then they should be imprisoned or punished for it. But here you have Herschel Walker, who, as I think David French says, had basically murder for hire. And who cares? Not that much. And then we wonder why the church doesn't have that influence anymore. And, yes, part of it is because we're a more diverse nation. People have other faiths and all of that. But as you have said, part of it is also our witness. And our witness has sucked. It's been terrible. And that we don't always live up to what we are professing. And then when that happens, when we're kind of found out, then we try to excuse ourselves and try to, offer different things. Well, it's for this reason or for that reason. And so people, I think they see through that and they have enough of it and they walk away.
Now let me see you go off like a bomb.
Dennis Saunders joining us. Something else is going to upset anybody, but it's true. We got the data. I think this is a thing, and this has been talked about by a lot smarter people than me. And I'm going to use a broad brush here because I have to get to the point, but I'll admit up front, this is a broad brush. Christian evangelicalism on the right, predominantly a middle-class white institution. By the vast majority, they have an absolute persecution complex where they are quite possibly the most privileged religious subsect of people that has ever walked the face of the earth. When you talk about wealth, when you talk about influence, this is fact. Christianity is a multi-billion-dollar industry in America. They have privileges, and I really think there's something to it that they innately understand. Well, if I can have political persecution, that validates all my feelings and that validates my beliefs. Folks are going to get mad. I'm going to get hate mail for that. Look, I is one. I'm a Baptist. Okay. I think there's something to that accusation. I think there's validity to the accusation. They want that martyrdom complex and they substitute politics for it because, and the culture's out to get me, the government's out to get me, the left's out to get me, and they are out to get my beliefs. When they're really, historically speaking, and compared to the rest of the world, they're very cushy and they're very comfortable. I don't know if it's a guilt thing. I don't know what it is. That's a real thing. I'm convinced of it. Am I wrong?
No, you're not. And that persecution complex has been around for decades. I think it's gotten worse over the last few years, especially as I think America has changed demographically and all of that. There hasn't been within American evangelicalism kind of a really deep reckoning on things. And I think that that needs to happen. I'm not, even though as you said, we come from different backgrounds. I think there is an important American evangelicalism is important. It has an important heritage, but it needs at some point to really face up to some of its shortfalls, and it hasn't. And I think especially during the Trump years, that has been really enabled to continue to feel as if they are the victims. And I don't know what happens to bring that about. Kind of like a lot of things that are happening in our world today, I don't have an easy answer or know how that happens. But it has to happen. And, I think both the religious and the political issues that we've been talking about, it almost feels like there has to be some type of outside crisis, a kind of the mother of all come to Jesus moments for that to happen. And I don't know when that will happen or how that will happen, but it seems like that's really the only way that something is going to change.
Yeah, Dennis Saunders joining us. I think this is where you start having problems within the church. Again, folks, this is grown folk talk. So if it's rough, maybe this episode ain't for you. We're just going to be real about a few things here. This is how you get the mess you're having with the Southern Baptist Convention right now.
Exactly.
It's because we do not want to discuss our churches as power structures. Because that's a social justice term, or that's a progressive term. No, it's just reality. I've had on Jennifer Greenberg. I've had on these abuse experts. We just did a episode on the Marilyn Monroe movie on exploitation, abuse and exploitation, and things like this. Whether it was Marilyn Monroe in the studio system, or kids in the church system, or the Catholic Church too, or a government organization, or even in a home with an abusive adult. It's always a power structure problem. And we have just absolutely refused to look at our churches as power structures because, especially in evangelical conservative Christianity, we put so much power on the pastors and on the superstars and on the televangelists that they become their own little power structures, and there's no accountability anymore, which number one isn't biblical, and I don't want to bore people to death, but that's completely against anything. You don't have a Bible verse for doing that. Sorry, you don't. I've heard them all. Okay. I've been to the Sword of the Lord conference. Just miss me with that. If you do not have accountability, if you do, this will preach. I've got a God in the Bible I read that says, test me. Mm-hmm. He's not afraid of accountability. If any human being holds up religion and says, no, we're not accountable, that's the biggest red flag of red flags. And yet folks still flock to these people. And that's when you get abuse, and that's when you get damage, and that's when you get people so far off the map that people really seriously get hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the interesting thing especially about the Southern Baptists, especially, is that because of their size, they have had a lot of influence in the culture. I think I remember we were talking earlier about Bill Clinton. I think they came up with a very strong kind of statement. I think it was at the 1998 convention about what was going on at that time. So, I mean, they have influence, and yet they also did, at the same time, did damage to their witness because they had a lot of pastors and other leaders and male leaders that were abusive, and they pretty much hid them and hid what was going on. And I think were very just horrible towards people who had been abused, in many cases, mostly women, which then brings up another issue about the role of gender. And I'm not, you don't have to agree with how I view of male-female relations, but that's a problem within evangelicalism. And again, there needs to be, at some point, some type of reckoning of how do we deal with all of this? Doesn't mean that y'all have to become progressives, but how do you come to terms? How do you repent? And how do you kind of reform?
Dennis Saunders joining us. This is why I love talking to him, because I can throw this real heavy stuff at him and he doesn't blink. The political movements that we're seeing now on the hardening right, national conservatism, Christian nationalism, you can call these a lot of different terms, but none of this is new. This is new branding, but none of this stuff is new. This is the same thing that I've told our Catholic friends about. They've got their theocratic movement too, and some of them are merging with this national conservative stuff, amazingly enough, which is really, really hilarious to me in a dark way. I don't buy you as a political movement when you can't even get your pews full on Sunday. I mean, you're telling me that you're going to have this great Christian national awakening. You can't even fill churches up, man, but you're going to have a political movement of it. So that tells me two things. One is you're not serious about it, because you would build your church first and then try to make it into a movement, if that was accurate. Number two, that also tells me that you know well and good the limits of your movement. And somebody said it on Twitter, and I would cite it, but they're like, if your movement starts with a conference, it's not a movement, it's a business model. I don't want to overplay, because I think people are losing their minds a little bit about how dangerous this is, because I don't think they're going to be more than a niche. I don't think they're going to be any bigger than what they really are. But I do think it's important to point it out. It's like, look, yes, America has a Christian tradition. Yes, we have In God We Trust on our money, but it's more complicated than that. And if you're going to have religious freedom, you have to give people some breathing room underneath that. And when you go to this Christian nationalism stuff, you're not only not giving people breathing room, but you're actively chasing down people's rights and freedoms, because those two things are just not compatible in the United States of America that's pluralistic. And it's going to hurt people that really do have faith. And that's the piece they don't understand, because they don't care, because it's about power, not about faith.
Well, that's the thing. It's not for a lot of these movements, Christian nationalism or anything, it's about power. It isn't about trying to fill up the pews. It's really about trying to control the levers of power. And in some ways, I don't see this any more different than kind of what's going on in Russia. If you talk about the Russian Orthodox Church and Patriarch Kirill, same thing, very much that kind of power grab. It's not about the church or trying to be Christ-like, to living out how Christ lived. It's about gaining the control of power, but we'll just sprinkle a little religious fairy dust on it and it'll make it all right.
Yeah, I've gotten my first death threats in quite a long time, because I wrote a piece that literally said, Patriarch Kirill can go to hell, because he was bringing back plenary indulgences for anybody that would go fight in Ukraine, which is just, I never thought I'd see that in my lifetime. But yeah, the bots got after me about that, but whatever, even crippled, pack a lunch, bring a bunch of friends, you're going to need it. That's the extreme example is what Kirill's doing, where he's saying, well, if you go off and fight, then your sins are forgiven, you go to heaven. Real crusader type stuff that we should not be seeing in the year of our Lord 2022.
No,
that's the extreme. But like the hypocrisy thing we started out talking about, that didn't happen overnight either. The Russian, that particular, I don't want to say all of them, because there's also descending parts of the Russian Orthodox Church that fought this stuff. The official Russian Orthodox Church has been corrupt for decades, going all the way back through the Soviet Union. This isn't a new thing. They got there by steps. The old Rich Mullins song, sometimes by steps. It applies to this too. That's why we need to talk about things like churches getting overtly political, and I don't care which way, because progressive churches have the same problem. They get all ate up on the politics, and they lose their ministry. This is why you got to start it and nip it in the bud, the Barney Fife theology. You got to nip it in the bud, because the Patriarch Kirills of the world didn't start out that way. They started out with, well, this guy's got to be in power so we can be in power. And you end up there. So, yeah, we probably won't see that in America in our lifetimes. Hopefully, who knows the way this is going. But that's why I think we do need to talk about this. It's culture and politics, because it's a ball of yarn that is not, you can't separate it anymore. And religion is more than one of those strands of yarn in that ball now. And I don't think it's healthy for us to pretend otherwise anymore, especially people that do take their faith serious. Look, I'm a pitiful Christian. I'm a C- at best Christian. That's on my good days. I don't preach at people because I'm very well aware of my own failings and my own sin, and I just don't, you can call me a hypocrite in a big hurry, and it's all true when it comes to faith because I'm not good at it. I fail. But if you care at all about faith, if you care at all about religious freedom, if you care at all about your country, daggone, we better start talking about this in an adult fashion in some form. I think some conflict would actually be healthy here, because right now everybody's just kind of doing it by osmosis and inertia, and that's why where are we at?
It's funny that you brought up Rich Mullins. He was actually probably in my more evangelical days. I really, and I still do, loved his music. There's a video that's been going around, and I don't know when it was from. I think maybe from the early to mid 90s, so it was just before his death. He was someone that challenged the evangelical culture of his day. But he not only challenged it, he actually lived it out. Money that he got, he actually had an accountant make sure that he got paid basically what was the, I guess, ongoing average wage for someone, and everything else was given away. He spent, I think, the last few years of his life working among the Navajo to teach music. He spoke out against kind of I would say the cushy lifestyle sometimes that especially a lot of evangelicals were living. And, we need more of those type of people in our culture today. Maybe, I don't know if that's a prophet or not, but I mean, we are sorely lacking of those type of people who not only who can speak out, but also live it out. We have a lot of people that talk a lot, but they don't really believe what they necessarily believe. It's really all about power. And I think we need more Rich Mullins in our culture and in our political life these days.
I think Dennis Saunders joining us. I think this is a church-wide problem, especially on the evangelical right, which, again, I hate that term, but it's what I got, so I got to use it, especially conservative churches. There's zero tolerance for the dissenters anymore.
Oh,
there's very little tolerance for the characters. They just get decried as liberals and get ran out. And this has been a long time building. You can go back to the moral majority days and look. Let me go to history, because I want to stick to facts and not my opinion all the time. You can say what you want about the Christian fundamentalists of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, but when they said separation, they meant it. They didn't want nothing to do with the politics. They wanted to be left alone. They were wrong about a lot of things, but when they said it, they meant it, and they believed it, and they went out and lived it. This new strand of fundamental Puritanism that is mixing the politics and the culture, and they're saying, well, we've got to do this, this, and this. I think that's the biggest problem they got, is nobody that's outside of their clique, nobody that's outside of that niche, and even people like me who are, probably more sympathetic to them than other people because I understand where they're coming from. There's no way to look at their support of people. I'm just going to go there, like a Herschel Walker, like a Donald Trump. Like, if you tell me, okay, I'm supporting Donald Trump for this, and this reason, and he's got these failings, but I've done, okay, fine. Even if I don't agree, I heard your logical, thought-out argument. I'm talking about the people who pitched him as a religious leader. I'm talking about the people like, oh, well, he's a Christian now, even though there's zero evidence of that whatsoever. I'm talking about the people who just slap that peg as a widget into their wheel of already existing whatever's going on in their ideology, philosophy, and theology, and just press ahead because nothing ever dents the bubble. That's where not having dissonance. That's where not getting challenged on anything. That's where having a closed loop system, to use the Apple term, because I'm not in the cult of fruit, you poor souls that are. I'm praying for you. That closed loop system, though, this is what it creates 10 out of 10 times. You can't have dissent. You can't think. You can't challenge. That's not democratic. It's not healthy. And I could argue pretty successfully that's not really biblical either, which is full of people being challenged and God himself saying, go ahead and challenge me. It's okay because I can handle it because God. This closed loop stuff is dangerous because that's where you get that power structure. That's where you get the bad political ideas. That's where you get some really nasty stuff. And all that stuff starts with being a little bit of tolerant of the long-haired hippies saying, well, why don't we just feed people and not worry about the rest of it? I don't agree with them, but you hear that opinion because it'll push you a little bit. Or, hey, let's debate what this verse really means, or let's debate the ratio between doing things internally for studying and doing things outwardly in the community. Because no, you can't just be a food bank either, because now you're not a church either, you're a food bank. But we're not having any of those conversations, it seems like.
No, we're not. I think, kind of going back to that the GOP isn't a political party anymore, is that I think when political parties usually have some give for difference, that we're not all going to have the same opinion on the same issue all the time. There might be people in a certain part of the country that are, have more room or tolerance for gun, let's say for gun restrictions than other parts of the country. And there used to be that sense of tolerance and give. And again, when political parties, and this is all on both sides, when they become identities, then you can't have dissent, because if there's dissent, then that challenges the identity and it challenges who you are. I mean, I think that's, the Democrats years ago, there used to be a healthy amount of pro-life Democrats. When I hail from Michigan, and Dale Kildee was the person that represented my part of the state. He was a longtime pro-life Democrat. You don't have that anymore. There is no room in the Democratic Party for dissent on that issue. And again, when parties basically are identities, this is what you end up with, and it's building towards something that's not good for the country.
Dennis Saunders joining us, using church really broadly to include everybody, Catholic, Protestant, whatever. People of faith, even our Jewish friends, Muslim friends, Hindu friends, Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, we'll throw them in too because the colanders are really cool. How do we get people of faith to take religious freedom seriously? Because, frankly, the people of faith not taking religious freedom seriously is the biggest threat to religious freedom, in my opinion.
It starts by seeing that that other person is a child of God. It starts by seeing them from your faith as someone that is created and by God and is deserving of respect and of freedoms that you have, even if you don't agree with them. In that you allow them as a Christian to be able to live out their life in the best way that is possible. The problem now is that God has become tribal, and so our gods can't see beyond anything from ourselves. And so if there is someone that is different from us, then they're not simply different and just and we don't see them as people that have the freedom to kind of live out their lives, but as the enemy that must be destroyed. And I think for anything to change, we have to see each other, see the person who is different from us as someone, at least within the Christian faith, as someone that is a child of God, even if we don't agree with them. And because of that, we want to give them the utmost respect.
Is that why 11 a.m. on Sunday is the most segregated hour in America still?
Yes. Yeah, I think it is. I think it's funny. I think, I was just hearing something earlier on the Dispatch podcast about the fear, especially among white conservatives, of not wanting to be called racist. And obviously that makes some sense. But I think we still, especially I think within American evangelicalism, there is still an issue when it comes to race. That doesn't mean necessarily that people are running around in hoods and setting fire to things, but I think people still haven't been able to reach out and see that someone who's African American or Latino or whatever is just another person, and that it's important to build a bridge and not a wall. And I think we're not, at least in some parts of American evangelicalism, that's not a possibility at this point.
And that'll do it for Heard Tell. Did it a little different today, but that's important. Look, that's the grown folk way of doing these cultural stories, these political stories, these breaking news stories. It's what we're always going to try to do here. We'd love to hear feedback from you. HeardTellShow@gmail.com. HeardTellShow on the Twitter. Also, comments and reviews in any of the platforms that you're watching or listening to the program. We do see those. Love to interact with you on those. We'd love to hear from you, because if you ain't listening and watching, we ain't got anybody to talk to. This is a partnership, and we appreciate you very much for however it is you spend your time with us. We always want to respect it. We never want to waste your time, so we bring you the stories that matter, like this one. Till we see you again on Heard Tell, wherever you and yours are, across the street or around the world. We hope you are well. We hope you are well fed. We hope this story makes you hug your loved ones just a little bit more. We'll talk to you about it next time on more Heard Tell. All the music on Heard Tell is provided under a Creative Content license from monstercat.com.